This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from an Expat's Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia.
Hi everybody, welcome to this video. Today we're going to talk about what it is like to live in Moscow with a family. I didn't have a family when I lived in Moscow, but Marcus had 2 children while he lived in Moscow. Marcus, what did you like and maybe dislike about living in Moscow with a family?
Actually, my oldest daughter, we lived pretty much when she was 1 to 7, almost 8 years old. And my youngest daughter, she was born in Germany, and then she went up to 5 years old. So we had 2 small girls, and the things that I'll start with the negative. We didn't have a car with our first child. So that was, you could get around with public transportation around Moscow fairly easily. Sometimes in the winter it was hard with the stroller, but it was manageable, and lots of young families, do it. When we had our second child, that was when I got a car, and it was much easier to go do things. But the last 3 years we lived in Moscow, we lived near a metro station, and we could go into the city within 20 minutes. We lived within about 3 minutes from the metro station, Yugo-Zapad. All around us there were shops. There was a music school my daughter went to. There was a brand new shopping center that they built with a movie theater. There was a few ice rinks. The thing that I remember most, out of the advantages to living in Moscow with a small family, is I asked my kids what they missed, because now we're in Germany. They said that they loved the snow, so they didn't mind the cold weather. They loved, what about getting dressed all the time to go outside and play? Because Russian kids are outside all the time, rain or shine or snow. So
American kids were too when we were kids.
Yeah.
Well, I played outside all the time.
So I grew up in Oregon. It was just rainy. So
no, true. Well, in Maine, where I grew up, we were always outside playing in the winter. Always. But anyway, go on, sorry.
So in Russia, it's like you have to go outside, spend some time outside, whatever the weather. But they really enjoyed playing in the snow. That's something that they miss now. But the advantages compared to where I grew up in, rural Oregon, and here in Germany now. In Moscow, there's so many things. Obviously, it's a huge city, right?
Right.
But there's so many things to do, and it's on an expat salary, it's so cheap. To give you an idea, my daughter had music lessons, I think, twice a week. She played piano and flute, and I think I paid about $65 a month for 2 lessons a week. 1 private lesson on piano, and the other, it was like a group music lesson with choir and stuff. And then we often went to one of those huge play places where you kind of let your kid go all day, and that was probably like 500 rubles or less for the entrance. And
right. Well, I want to say real quick while you bring this up, I didn't have any children while I lived in Russia, but I was married, and when you're married, you're at least looking at things
right
from a potential family perspective. And one thing that always struck me even before I was married was just how many amenities there are for children in Moscow. I mean, almost every restaurant you go to, of course I'm not talking about McDonald's, right? I'm talking about like a real restaurant you go to. There's little areas for children to play, or like tables to sit at, to color.
Right.
Or some of them even have, more intricate activities that the children can, do. All of the shopping malls have like a children's area. I lived at Dynamo, and on the top floor, there's this massive children's area.
Mm-hmm.
Massive. There's so many things to do.
Right. And nowadays, our kind of weekly family life, we would probably go once a week to some play place or something. Once a week, I would try to take my daughters to a theater. That was about 15 minutes away. It was like maybe a puppet theater one week, or some kind of like Russian play for kids. And it was really cheap when you convert it to dollars, right? So ticket might have been 600 rubles or 800 rubles. Things that I didn't grow up with are classical music, like concerts, ballet, like operas, things that I could take my kids to when they were really young, even like 7, 8, 9.
Right.
That I never even experienced till I was like 18 until I went to Russia.
Yeah. Well, one thing, what's interesting is that in the United States, I'm noticing this now that I have a child. Now, again, we live in this sort of COVID world at the moment, but I'm very surprised how many I wouldn't say dirty looks, but I've gone to numerous restaurants with the baby and had someone look at me like, let me just go check to make sure we have a free table. When you look around, you're like, definitely free tables. I never ever saw something like that in Russia. It was like, if you have a kid, that like everyone's welcoming to having a child everywhere.
And I was surprised that,
you know, you're talking about these artistic events, you know, the arts. Children were always welcome to those. I mean, of course, if they're screaming, then you got to take them out, but that's just common courtesy. But I mean, in general, if your kids are well behaved, they're welcome everywhere in Russia.
And I was surprised. I went to some, you know, nicer restaurants, and you're like, wow, this is nice. And then in the corner, you know, there's a corner for kids, and you're thinking it kind of mismatches, but you know, that's what they have to do to cater towards, you know, people nowadays. So and more seems like there are more families. So other things that I really miss, actually, besides, you know, all the options of going to different museums. We went to like a dinosaur museum and a history museum, and all the all the information was in Russian and English. And at the dinosaur museum, I remember it had an app. I downloaded the app right at the door, and I was like, okay. So you scan the QR code, and I could listen to the audio in English. So I put one earpiece in each kid's ear to listen to. They didn't, you know, listen to everything, of course. But so sometimes, obviously, we spoke Russian, so it was easier. But for families who don't speak Russian, there are still lots of things that you can go do that are not dependent on Russian to enjoy. So some things.
Well, one thing I just want to point out.
Go ahead.
You didn't mention yet, and apologies if you were planning to. One of the things that I thought stuck out to me was how many parks there were in Russia and how many groups of kids were playing in all the parks. Like if you go to any of the major parks in Moscow or any Russian city, to be honest, there's always tons of kids playing there. I don't know for sure because I didn't have any kids, but I imagine many of them, you know, didn't know each other before running around in circles at the park. You know, there's lots of playgrounds, there's lots of parks with wide open space and areas to fish and, you know, just places to go and hang out outside.
I can think
of Moscow size.
I can think of 2 parks around our area in Yugoslav, where we live. They completely revamped the park and had a ton of different things for kids, and that we went there quite often. So nowadays it's really nice for little kids, or you know, under probably teenagers and younger.
12.
Just you can do so many things. Whenever we had a birthday party, Russians have this thing about they invited like a children's entertainer to their house or the restaurant, and they will entertain. They'll have this whole program, and you know, you pay the entertainer to pretty much entertain the whole group of kids for the birthday party. There were lots of options on like Instagram or social media or Avito, the kind of like the Craigslist of where we could order like custom cakes from somebody who does, you know, or we'd ask around. So there were quite a few things that we kind of didn't realize were so available until we left Moscow. So you could probably do something every week in Moscow with your kids and not have, you know, by the end of, 3-5 years, still not have visited every place.
So I think we just kind of wanted to convey that, yes, there are some logistical issues having children in Moscow, but I think most of those problems or negatives would probably apply in any big city, right? If you don't have a car. If you live in New York City and don't have a car, I imagine it's even worse. Maybe they plow the sidewalks a little bit better than Moscow and the stroller is easier to push. But other than that, I mean, I think most of the struggles of having a small family in a large city exist.
Well, I would say one of the big struggles is there's, you know, more snow than most places, probably where our audience comes from. So I remember pulling my kids on the sled to school and kindergarten, and like if we were late, I'm like running and I'm all sweaty and pulling them through the snow. They loved it because they were on the sled, but for parents it is tough, that kind of winter period, because you're getting your kid. Anytime you go to this, like, you just want to run to the store, get some milk. It's right down the street. You get your kid dressed. If it's a little kid, you know, you sit there, put on his long underwear and then his snowsuit, and he can barely walk through the snow because it's, or ice. So that's kind of on the parent side, but kids don't really pay attention to that.
So actually, we'd be really interested to hear if there are any other families who are watching our channel, you know, how you find living in Moscow with a family. Let us know in the comments. We hope you liked the video, and we'll see you next time.